Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. Most of us are aware that time-space is not a continuum, but can fold and loop in on itself, causing glitches which can create very strange experiences. Thanks to 3 Weird World viewers who have sent accounts of this eerie phenomenon. Annie wrote to us about her father's true story, which he told to her. Her father and his friend were walking through France back in the 1950s. The young men enjoyed going on adventures through rural France, sleeping under the stars at night and being fed courtesy of kind strangers in return for odd jobs and sometimes foraging. One night, deep in the French countryside, he and his friend bedded down for the night under some hedgerows. There were no buildings of any kind as far as the eye could see, also no people or grazing animals, nothing but rough land, literally in the middle of nowhere. At about midnight, and in the pitch black of night, they were ready to sleep when suddenly both of them heard a bell ringing, a school bell in fact. They thought that maybe a cow was wandering around with a bell around its neck that just happened to sound like a school bell. The young men jumped to their feet and looked over the hedge, only to see an old-fashioned wooden school building with a little steeple. The building had large sash windows and looked quaint, with flowers planted around it. There, on the steps leading up to the door, was a school teacher in antiquated Victorian garb, a long black dress, a knitted black shawl, ankle boots, and a bodice which looked ridged like a corset was underneath. She was loudly ringing a bell, but did not speak. The men could see the woman as clear as day. She had a stern face, her hair pulled up in a bun on top, and looked about 40 years old. This scene was all lit up, like it was daytime, and as if the sun were out. There were children playing in the school dirt playground, with skipping ropes, but no modern play equipment. The boys were playing tag. All the girls were dressed in old-fashioned pinafores and with their hair in ribbons. The boys were also in old-fashioned Victorian attire of pantaloons and grubby off-white shirts. They were all making the noises of children playing and laughter noises, but suddenly the children became silent as they all lined up and filed into the building one by one, their hands held in front of them. When they were all inside, the teacher shut the door and the scene just faded out. The whole scene had lasted for about 15 minutes. The 2 men raced over to the spot, which was literally 200 yards away from where they were standing. They felt shocked and amazed, although not scared, by what they had both witnessed. But there was nothing at all in the space where they had witnessed the strange scene. The next morning they looked again in the spot, but found nothing. They walked to a nearby town and asked around. They were told that indeed there had been a school there in that location in the early 1800s. The school was for the children of local farmers, but tragically had burned to the ground, with the teachers and 15 children perishing in the fire. The 2 men talked about their eerie experiences for the rest of their lives. Marit in Finland wrote about something that happened to her in the early 90s when she was about 8 years old. She was on a school trip with teachers, parents and siblings to a place about a 4-hour drive away, a small East Finnish town called Savonlinna. The place is famous for its 15th century castle called Olavinlinna, which they visited. The castle's history told of a young maiden who had lost her life in the castle. She fell in love with an enemy Russian soldier with whom she would often meet in secrecy. One day, the soldier asked if they could meet inside the castle at night time, to which the young woman agreed. When night fell, she went to let the man in, but he wasn't alone. There was a whole army waiting outside. She had been deceived by her lover. The men attacked the castle, but were unable to invade it and were driven away. The young woman had played no part in the plot, but was sentenced to death for treason and buried alive in a wall of the castle's inner yard. The story goes that as a sign of her innocence, a rowan tree grew out of her heart and through the wall. This is a story the guides will always tell people who take a tour in the castle, and Marit was standing in the inner yard when the guide told her group this story. Next to her was a couple whom she didn't know, but she heard them saying, "Wow, look at that, it's so high." She looked up to see what they were talking about and saw a small, yet very green and lively looking, rowan tree. It was growing out from the wall, very high up from the ground. She kept looking at this sight and wondered with her child's brain how a rowan could grow there. How did the seed get in there? Where did it get its nutrition and water from, etc.? She stared at the tree for a long time with the couple, all finding its presence bizarre. A few years later, at the age of 17, Marit's best friend was now living in Savonlinna. She went to visit her, and together they visited Olavinlinna Castle. Marit told her friend that she wished to see the rowan tree again. There was a tour group waiting to go, so they decided to head inside the castle first so that they wouldn't be in the way of the tour group. They circled around the castle but didn't see the rowan tree, so she wondered if it had fallen down or been cut down. Later, they caught up with the tour group, where the tour guide was telling her group the story of the innocent maiden. Marit and her friend stood nearby and eavesdropped on the story. The guide told her group that there had been a rowan tree growing on one of the castle walls, but it had come down in a bad storm in the 1950s. Marit told her friend that this couldn't be true, as she had seen the tree in the early 90s. When she later did research of the castle's rowan tree, she found out that it had indeed come down in the 1950s during an especially heavy storm. The castle's official webpage also confirmed this. Not only that, but there was a photograph of the said rowan tree that she had discovered, but it was nothing like the tree she had seen. It was very tiny, thin and weedy looking. On top of that, it had been growing in the wrong spot, near the castle's roof's edge. The rowan tree that she and the unknown couple had seen in the 90s was very lush, healthy and green, and was growing around the midway of the castle's inner yard wall. What was especially mysterious was that when she spoke with another friend about the mysterious tree, she also said that she had seen it in the 90s, in the exact same spot where Marit saw it. There were no records of any other rowan trees or any other trees growing out from the castle's wall except the one that was photographed and which came down in the 50s. And that wasn't the tree she saw. She's still wondering, Timeslip or ghost tree. Our viewer Kevin did not personally experience this time slip, but has heard of the strange story which occurred in his home country of England. The account centres around the Flixborough disaster, which occurred in Lincolnshire, northern England, on Saturday, June 1st, 1974. This was a chemical plant explosion which tragically resulted in 28 deaths. At around noon that day, a resident in the nearby town of Grimsby by the name of Leslie Castleton was watching her television when a newsflash was announced. The word newsflash appeared on the screen, and a male voice reported news of an explosion at the chemical plant in Flixborough, which was about 40 kilometres away. A couple who was staying with Leslie came in soon afterwards, and she mentioned it to them, but they hadn't heard anything about it. That evening, all three saw news reports of the disaster, but were puzzled when the time of the massive explosion was given as late afternoon. The Journal of the Society for Psychical Research investigated this strange phenomenon. They confirmed the reliability of the witnesses and that the explosion was completely unexpected, with no workers on the site suspecting problems. They therefore ruled out any possibility of telepathy and found Leslie's time slip experience to be a case of ostensible precognition. The young woman had a visual and auditory premonition of the disaster hours before the event took place.